All right. Class, it is happening. So this week in this class, today we're going to start our projects. And I would like to give people just kind of a class period to start thinking about their design and to bounce their designs off of me, as well as possibly to come up and utilize the entire board if they'd like to start thinking about what are the UMLs for these going to look like? How are we going to put these together? And that way you can also get critiques from me or for the rest of the class. And we can learn from each other about the designs of our project. So we have a few more design patterns to cover, and we have 4 weeks to do it, which is plenty of time for those associated design patterns. And I don't just want to chain them back to back to back to back because they're each relatively complicated and I don't want to get so far ahead in lectures. So I think this is a reasonable thing to do today. So let's go ahead and get started with that. If people could pull up the write-up for the project and then just start thinking about, what do you want to do with this? What direction do you want to take it? What does the breakdown look like? The goal for the end of the day is to have some kind of design in place where you can start going and filling in some of those classes with some actual code. But we need to spend quite a bit of time doing the actual design for this before you jump into the code, because otherwise you will get lost and there will be lots of bugs. So let's take some time and start that. Does anyone feel like they're in a reasonable place with the design of the project so far? I expect that most people haven't really thought about it or started too much yet. But if anyone is at a place where they think they'd like to share, we could start there. If not.
Like for the final project?
Yeah. Yeah, today's just gonna be a final project planning day.
So I was working on that one and I got stuck obviously. But I was thinking to have three classes for different seats type. Like if it is a business class or VIP or whatever, and then wrap the ticket up with that information. So based on the type of the class, the type of the seat, the ticket cost is gonna change. And
Okay,
based on how many baggage the passenger has, so using the pattern, design pattern, the decorator.
Yeah.
To wrap it up. That's
Yeah.
what I was thinking.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot indeed. So yeah, you could do things like whenever there's gonna be a checked bag, you can wrap a ticket in a checked bag. And that way, if there are 3 checked bags, you can wrap it 3 times in checked bags. And then you go to query the cost, it will be very similar to how the lab was set up, where each object is going to figure out how much do I cost and how much does everything that I'm wrapping cost. And that would allow you to be able to figure out recursively the cost of the entire ticket. So I like it. So my recommendation is get started on one large UML for the entire project. So start designing what are the actual classes going to look like. The way you're going to start this is you're going to figure out where are the design patterns going to be in my project. So where is strategy? Where is decorator? Where is builder? And then look at refactoring guru for each of those associated patterns and figure out, okay, so if I remember correctly from the builder pattern, I need to, as a client, interface with a director, and the director is going to be calling the concrete builders for each of those. So that means that wherever the builder is going to be, you need to make sure there is a decorator class. And the client is going to be communicating with the decorator using the decorator's methods. So what methods need to be in a decorator so that the decorator ends up with, not the decorator, oh my gosh. Whatever it's called. Brain can't work today. What is it called? Builder has a, We'll go pull it up. Been too long that it's not in recent. So you're gonna be communicating directly with the director. Let's see, where did this end up? Let me actually share this. I think it'll make a lot more sense if this is actually up. I was saying director a bunch, and then I lost the term director. It's funny how that works. But you would have some kind of class substructure that looks like this, where if the client is communicating with the director, then the director is going to have the associated methods that the client needs to interact with. The director needs to have an amount of information that it needs to be able to construct the concrete builder out of the builder interface. So wherever your builder is going to be, there are going to be at least this many classes. You need a director, you need a builder interface, you need at least one type of builder that implements that interface with the ability to construct something from that. So wherever your builder is going to be, make sure it has some structure that looks like this. Wherever your decorator is going to be, make sure it has something that looks like the decorator's set of classes. Wherever your strategy is going to be, what are the associated inheritance hierarchies between your object type, it's like the duck from before, and the different strategies, the fly behaviors, the quack behaviors, the swim behaviors that are composed and swappable at runtime. So try to have all of that class layout done by the end of today's class. And that way I can answer any questions that you have as you come up with this. And I can also verify that what you do come up with is going to work when you go try to implement it. So this is the first time you're probably putting together yourself a big project with 10+ classes in it. So make sure that as you're constructing it, you're thinking about the big picture and the design of the project. And the resources that I would use for this, let me make sure that I can pull that up so that people can see. I would be using Refactoring Guru and then just going to the associated patterns. This is the decorator. And then you can see that there is all of the associated, here's the structure. So make sure that you are utilizing the structure of the associated patterns, but you're probably going to need a bit more than that. How does everyone feel about the ability to get started on the design portion of the project?
I think I can do it, but it's not gonna come naturally.
Right. It came naturally. I would wonder where you got the experience. The idea is you're gonna be getting the experience from going through this process. Do people at least feel like they can get started?
Yeah,
Get started, get stuck, let me know where you get stuck, and as always, I am happy to help with the design.
So for this project, we will not create a test class. We are gonna create a driver class that's gonna run and then do all the things.
Yeah,
We're not gonna do any testing. You're just gonna.
there will be a little bit of testing that you'll need to do as part of the project, but it will not be anywhere near as thorough as the lab tests
Okay.
for the labs. You won't need to write thousands of tests for this. You'll like write 10 or 20 tests associated with it, yeah.
How would you go about doing airport codes?
You'd have to hard code them probably. So just have a few airports, keep this reasonably sized. There are a lot of airports out there. So I would say something like you're gonna want a base airport class,
Yeah.
and there's going to be some string code that we know is gonna exist in some airport. And then this is gonna be an inheritance hierarchy, so there's gonna be some airport. So maybe we make GEG, Spokane's airport. And that code, in this case, is going to get GEG, but we're not gonna call this is gonna be, Spokane. And in the constructor for Spokane, we would set this dot code equals and then maybe as part of the ticket, if you wanted to do something like somewhere in the ticket class, be able to print things like where are we flying from and where are we flying to, we wouldn't want to say Spokane to somewhere. We would say, we would use the code. So maybe you want to write a get code, but probably not a set code because we don't want to change the airport code of a particular airport. Once we set it in the constructor, great. We would need to be able to get it if we wanted to do something like print it on a ticket. And this is, of course, inheritance. You can make another airport. Moon. Where this dot code equals nothing that says it has to be exactly 3 characters. This is part realism, part ridiculousness. Perfectly fine. What I care much more about is that the structure looks good.
Okay, so when we run the program, when we run the application, should it ask like how many passengers and from which airport, source, and then destination airport? All this information is gonna be input by the user.
Yeah,
And then the program is gonna store that information, number of passenger, seat type, source and destination airport, number of luggage.
I would think, yeah, the director of your builder is gonna wanna store something like this.
Okay, and then based on these information, you're gonna wrap it, we are gonna do all the other
Yep.
stuff. Okay.
Yep. And then the idea is eventually you should be able to do something like print a ticket or print the reservation. So maybe you have a reservation class, and by the time all of the associated information has been input, then you could print the reservation. And then I should be able to see all of that information. Like the total cost of everything. I should be able to see. It should be intuitive to use. I'm not stating exactly what that needs to look like. It's just that it just needs to adhere to those basic requirements of your boss, of it needs to be easy to use, which means that as the user, I need to be able to know what I'm measuring at all times. I need to know all of that information. It needs to be thorough. And then I need some way of knowing, was it correct or not? So some way to print it out and look at it. But I'm not specifying exactly what that has to be either. as long as it uses the design patterns. Does anyone have any questions at this point or individual questions where I could help you with your design? Start by thinking about the different objects that you're going to have. I would even just make a list. What are the different object types? So we know we need to have a single reservation. A reservation is going to be made up of some number of tickets, so we need some kind of ticket class. But a ticket, if we want to do this as a builder form, maybe we need something like a ticket director. Which is going to call something like a ticket builder. And then that is going to create a ticket class or a ticket object. So this would be where the builder pattern is going to live in my example. Okay, now that we have that, what other objects are going to be part of this design? Well, we need some kind of airport. Just gonna have some subclasses of exactly whatever airports we're going to have. We're going to need some kind of airplane. With some specific kinds of airplanes. We're going to need probably some kind of maybe a seat object or a seat decorator. So maybe there's a seat object or a seat decorator. I'm gonna need an airline. And the associated different kinds of airlines that I want to support. I might need something like a boarding strategy. With an associated different kinds of boarding strategies. If I'm going to use this as the strategy. Maybe I don't want to do this. Maybe instead I want to have airplanes are composed of fly behaviors. And airplanes fly in different ways. So you could have either a boarding behavior or a fly behavior or something that is my strategy pattern. So this would just be something like my thought process for how I would go through a design of what kinds of classes and structures and hierarchies am I going to need. This is not UML yet, it's just kind of a brain dump of here are all of the parts of this project. Is this done? Is this everything that we want to incorporate? Maybe, maybe not. Spend some time and think about, is there, what else? Go look at the associated design patterns and say, am I taking everything into consideration with regards to each of these patterns? Identify that here is where I want an airplane to be made up of a fly behavior. This is my strategy. Seats and seat decorators. Here is going to be my decorator. Tickets and ticket builder. This is going to be my builder. So now that I've identified this, I'm going to go look at Refactoring Guru and make sure that I am incorporating and using all of the associated classes in the structure to make sure that I'm adhering to each of these patterns or what I'm going to do with each of these patterns. Once you finish that process, once you feel like you're set on how you're going to incorporate each of the design patterns, then I would start turning this dump into an actual UML diagram. Try to make it a class diagram that is similar to the class diagrams that we had, where you're actually listing out the fields and methods for each one of these classes. So when you figure out, okay, an airplane is going to have a fly behavior, then you should add that as a field to the airplane class. Then you would have a fly as a method that is going to be in the airplane class. And the fly will just implement the associated fly behavior of that generic type. Once you have a draft of that UML, that's when I would come up to the board and I would actually draw out that UML. And then we can use people who are willing to do this and say, does this look complete? Has this person thought of everything? And then you can get some feedback from a class about what's missing. Is there duplicate logic somewhere? So by the end of today's class, try to have a complete UML. Anyone have any questions I can answer at this stage?
I think this part was the most difficult one.
Yeah,
I was working on this on the weekend, and I don't know how many designs I had in my mind, but when I sit and start typing that and then drawing that, that was the most difficult one.
yeah,
And all the thoughts I had, none of them worked.
yeah. That is very challenging and difficult to make sure that you're thinking of everything. You have a bird's eye view. I think the UML really helps with that. Drawing different levels of diagrams as well. So rather than have all of the associated pieces of the ticket, if you just abstract that all to this is the concept of the ticket, then you can draw a really abstract small diagram with just the major components and say, how do these major components interact? And then you can zoom in on each one of those subcomponents and make another UML diagram, very similarly to how we had kind of the really small abstract UML diagrams and the more complicated components UML diagrams. Make kind of a tiered diagram that shows the high level scope and then the low level scope for each one of those components. Get a sense of how does all of this work together? And then go implement it. If you try to do, for instance, the builder, if you were to just right now, sit down and try to make the builder, I would argue that no matter what you do, if you haven't really thought through how all of this works together, you're probably going to be going and doing a massive refactor of this builder once you figure out how everything else wants to work. You're not going to get it all right on the first go around. Although I guess the wording for that is a little right versus wrong is going to be very application dependent on exactly what you want to do with the project. So it's not like there's a right way to do it. You're going to change your mind about exactly how you want things to work. And as you change your mind, then you have to be going and doing large scale refactors of your code. So the more you can think through it in advance, know what you want to do, the less refactoring you're going to have to do when you sit down to actually implement all of this. Another thing to consider is there are places for extra complexity in here, and I don't know if you want to do that. If you do, save it for the very end. Like for instance, if you're trying to adhere to the builder pattern, there are multiple concrete builders in this. You may only want one concrete builder. If you're making your builder to be the ticket builder, maybe you only want one way to construct a ticket. That's gonna minimize the complexity of your project. If you wanted to extend that, you could have an adult ticket builder and a child ticket builder. And there are lots of different kinds of builders that you could make. But start simple. Get the base thing working before you worry about there being multiple concrete builders. You can still adhere to this pattern without adding multiple builders. It'll still be extendable with a single builder that creates a single ticket product. So if we wanted to map, for instance, what I've done so far onto this, I think everything is pretty straightforward except for what is the context? What is the context class in this case? Maybe we'll start easier than that. What's the strategy and what are the concrete strategies?
Is it the ticket and type of tickets?
So we have our strategy inside of this airplane and fly behavior, something or other thing. The idea is that airplanes can fly in some way. And if we have multiple different kinds of airplanes, we would have to describe how they fly. We have to write the logic for how they fly every time for every different airplane type. So instead, we could make a fly behavior class and we could say fly with wings, fly with rotor, fly with rocket engine, different ways that a different kind of spacecraft, aircraft could fly. So we would have concrete strategies associated with some kind of fly behavior interface, and then we would have an airplane interface and the associated different kinds of aircraft that we want to include in our system. So how do we map all of those onto reading something like Refactoring Guru's structure? What is the strategy interface and what are the concrete strategies in this system?
The interface might be flag behavior.
Yeah,
Concrete strategies might be like it's a jet plane. Or if it's
Yeah.
like,
fly with wings, fly with rotor, fly with rocket engine. So that's the strategy. And the concrete strategies, you can think of these as the algorithms that are swappable at runtime. So we're gonna have the algorithms defined with some kind of algorithm-based interface here, which means the context is what's happening that allows these strategies to execute. So in this case, it is the airplane's fly method or the airplane that flies. So the context is just the whatever is executing the strategy. So what executes fly? The aircraft. The aircraft executes the fly behavior. So we have the client interacting more so with the context. And in this case, the client is not like the driver program. The client may very well be the director of the builder. or something else, someone that needs access to this strategy in order to create it in the ticket. In order to create it in whatever is going to use it. So that's how you read it. This is very abstract because it wants to work for any context. We don't know exactly what context this is going to work with in general, but in this case, we know the context is an airplane attempting to fly. How does a particular airplane fly? Well, it depends on the flight behavior that it's composed of. So we have a composition between the context and the associated strategy. And then we see that there's some generalization between the concrete strategies and the strategy interface. Anyone have questions or want to talk out their design ideas with me?
I'm
Yeah,
just kind of confused, why do we have like a fly behavior? Wouldn't that increase the complexity?
it definitely does. But the question is just if, for instance, we wanted to go from one airport to another on a helicopter, or we wanted to be able to extend this code, then we need some way of swapping out at runtime. How does a particular aircraft fly? And we don't want to write the behavior for how does an airplane fly. We have lots of different kinds of regular aircraft. We have a Boeing 737, we have a Boeing 747, we have all of these different kinds of airplanes, and we don't want to copy and paste the logic of how that flying happens. And we don't want to create an abstract class that assumes that every aircraft flies the same way. Normally, we could do that. We could just make an abstract class called, fly, and everything would just fly the same way. It'd be static, and all airplanes would look at that. But if we had a helicopter that flew a different way, then we'd have to override that in that subclass to define that behavior. So instead, we're just going to factor it all out into a strategy pattern. And we're going to compose the airplane of its associated behavior. That says that if it's a regular airplane, its flight behavior will be fly with wings. And granted, this isn't the only place where strategy could play. We could make a boarding strategy for how to board the aircraft for your flight. This is just one example of how you could incorporate strategy into your project. I think it's probably the easiest way to incorporate it into your project, which is why I've decided to model it here, because I feel like quite possibly 80% or more of you are going to incorporate it this way. But it's mostly just to get practice with strategy. It definitely increases the complexity of the code, though. That was one of the downsides of the strategy pattern.
I guess I just didn't really understand like the big idea of the project itself, it's just incorporating the patterns that we
Yeah.
have learned.
Yeah. Into a larger scale application, because you'll see this in industry where the large scale project, you need to implement a bunch of different patterns that work together in tandem to produce something. So I want to get a small slice of an example of that for you in this class. That is a small, fairly contained sub-project that you can look at how the different patterns play off of each other and design around that. Get some experience with that for something that is fairly basic in nature compared to what it could be. And these patterns come up a lot in interviews. So one thing I am interested in doing in the long term is incorporating this class into software engineering, because I don't like how not applicable it is. Which means that I want to replace this class with something. And my idea is some kind of interview preparation, job preparation type course of how do you interview? How do you prepare for that? What kinds of coding problems should you prepare for? How do you present yourself? How do you work in a live coding environment? All of that I feel like is really important to go over. So that's my long-term plan for the class. But I think the most useful and relevant thing that you're gonna do in this class is this project. So the most like what you would see in an interview setting. Anyone else? Who can I work with? Who can I help out?
So for the flight, how much detail should we go, like date, time of the flight, destination, like? Is it
Stuff like
necessary?
that. Yeah, I would keep it as simple as possible, especially since it's not really part of one of the design patterns. Keep it simple, and if you find yourself with the time and desire at the end of the project, you can add some complexity to it. Like, we need to know what the intermittent airports are. One student last quarter did something like figure out how long the flight was gonna take, the total number of miles that were covered through that. Tried to come up with realistic times for the associated flights, given all of that information. There's quite a bit that you could do with that if you wanted to and had time, but rather than focusing on that as part of your design or right away, make that part of your extendability. And then you can see how easy it is to work with if you have created the associated design patterns in the project. You'll come up with, oh, this is a really cool idea. And you'll realize, I don't have to change very much to make that idea come to fruition. I just add some classes here to these patterns and change up how this works a little bit, and now it incorporates this cool idea that I had. But yeah, start with the absolute basics.
I don't know why, I'm just having a huge, like, trying to visualize.
Yeah.
In my mind, I think reservation, then there's a subcategory of ticket, which makes into the builder, which then just like a huge tree
Yeah.
layout of everything else.
Yep. That's pretty reasonable, because the builder, like the client shouldn't have access to things like what airplane they're gonna fly on. That's gonna be the builder that figures that out. If you have a source and a destination, maybe you can hard code a particular airplane flies that particular route. And that way the director can do a lookup in the builder and say, builder, get me the associated aircraft for this flight. And that will do a lookup of some kind for the associated airplanes, but it's the director's responsibility to make that query and the builder's responsibility to actually find it. It has nothing to do with the client. Just make sure that the associated structure, but yeah, you're exactly right, that it's gonna kind of go from there. The client should really just give the associated information, wait, and get a ticket back. So from the client's perspective, there's very little interaction. But yeah, each ticket is gonna be part of a reservation. Then maybe the reservation class is as simple as the field is gonna be a ticket array of some kind. That's gonna say what tickets are in this reservation. And then, I don't know, what else is there associated with that? Maybe there's a print reservation method that returns to the screen some kind of representation of all of the tickets that are in that reservation. It may not need to be more complicated than that. So composition here. A ticket's gonna look like the ticket builder, so we bring up the creational builder pattern. Ticket is going to have, so the client for this is going to be the actual client. But we have a ticket class. Ticket class is going to have, so that's the, we don't have a builder, this is the product.
Yeah.
This is the product of that. So we need to make sure that the client is interacting with a ticket director. So the ticket director is going to be interacting with the ticket builder interface. Which is going to have an actual concrete ticket builder. So it's like an airplane ticket builder. And we have associated relationship there, and then this produces the associated ticket object. So that's kind of your builder setup. So we're going to have a reservation asked to make a ticket. Maybe one way to do it. So we have this system kind of for your builder, and then a ticket is going to have composition inside of that of everything that the ticket is composed of. Outside of the how does the builder work for this? So all right, to build a ticket, what do we need? What do we need to be able to do as part of this? So the airplane ticket builder is going to have to query and figure out, okay, what is the airplane? One thing we haven't really talked about is how do we identify a seat in an airplane? Because we're going to instantiate an actual airplane. And if your seat is one of the seats of that airplane, we should then have some way of saying this seat is now filled with a person for this flight. We don't want multiple people fighting over the same seat because our algorithm just assigns everybody to the same seat. So here's how I'd start, but now the question is, what does this airplane ticket builder need to do? How is it going to build its associated ticket? What does it need access to be able to do that? Because the ticket builder is going to return this ticket. So I think the rest of this just kind of becomes a big tree of what does the ticket builder need to be able to construct the ticket? So it's just about time to head out. But my challenge for you, I'm going to be revealing the builder lab. You're going to be working on the builder lab throughout this week as well. But on the side of that, try to get this done over the next couple of days and have something that you'd like to share. And probably by the end of this week, I'd like to have another class like this one, where people have this part done and they want to come up and share their thoughts and their design to help out those of you who are really struggling with it and to get feedback about what are you missing, what aren't you thinking about.
And that was kind of what I was thinking, it just didn't feel correct.
Yeah.
Could you kind of just look at this in
Yeah.
separation of from just, because I kind of just did it instead of that, which I know I'll probably have to, but like get like a general idea of just me, so I made this looking for reservation from the builder and then to my builder almost to get information and flight information. These three like buildings almost.
Yeah.
That kind of tells you everything you need inside of them, and then these that are going. Like the different types of seats, I guess. This can go first.
Each one needs to be a product. So I think the only thing a ticket builder is going to build a ticket. You could have a flight builder that builds a flight, but it would be a separate builder interface. I think it would have different methods that you would be thinking about. We're trying to incorporate. So I like this as a starting place. But the question is, what do we need now in order to do the rest of this? We need to figure out what is the associated airplane with this flight. And there's going to be a separate UML probably with an associated flight. This is kind of from the airline's perspective. So let's say now that we are taking Delta, some airline that is managing a flight between Spokane and Seattle. What do they need for that flight information? There needs to be some kind of airplane that's associated with that flight. And then when this ticket builder says, I would like to get a ticket for this particular flight, then this needs to change the associated flight that says, all right, is there a seat available? If so, which seat is it? Is there a request for a first class ticket? Is there a request for, so is there a first class seat available on this aircraft? If no, return failure. Return failure, return failure. There's no seat on this plane. If there is, assign a seat that says, and you don't necessarily have to let the client pick their seat. That's an added complication that we don't need yet. That would be a cool feature to have eventually. But for now, just say that the ticket builder is going to query the flight information and say, return to me a seat that isn't filled yet. Then you can make this associated ticket and associate it with that seat on that airplane. And
Is there any
then,
way if we could slow it down a little bit?
yeah,
Cause I feel like it's just like a lot of shit just being thrown
yeah,
at me right now.
yeah.
So basically what you're saying is that we should have a builder for everything that we need to construct single, like
I would
by
have
themselves.
I would have a single builder. And
So
I
only one builder for the reservation.
I would make it for a ticket, and that way, if we have a bunch of different tickets within the same reservation, it's the same building process for that, because each one is gonna have a separate seat.
Mhm.
So let's say that we're all one big happy family, we want a single reservation to go from Spokane to Seattle.
Okay,
We would call the ticket builder for each one of us to construct your ticket and associated seat on that flight, your ticket and the associated seat on that flight, et cetera.
what would
And
you put in the ticket director?
so this is all of the logic for constructing this. So here we're gonna have things like, you're gonna be entering a field of your name and the date that you'd like to fly and all of that information. All that's gonna get sent to the director. The director says, with all of this information, I can go figure out what the associated flight is going to be. So this can now go query this part of the application where we have an airline. And the airline is gonna say, all right, if we're going from Spokane to Seattle, that is Delta. Delta makes that associated flight.
Hmm.
So Delta has a bunch of, maybe Delta has some number of airplanes in that. And then when we go to make a flight, maybe there's a flight class that uses an airplane. And when we go to do this, we're going to, if it doesn't already exist, instantiate it. So now it's like, this is an actual object that's happening. This is going to have an airplane that has some seats. And now, when this goes to query, is there an available seat on this flight? The answer is, what is the associated airplane with this flight? Is there a seat available? Now, a seat probably just has a Boolean field, and then just sets that to true. And it returns the string, something like, well, I don't know, what is it? 12B. As the seat associated with this, that returns to the ticket builder. And then when a ticket has an associated seat on an associated airplane, so it'll return the associated airplane associated with this flight. It'll return the associated seat on that airplane. And then you have a global state now that is a flight that's actually happening. And this ticket is associated with this seat on this airplane. It is a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's there. This class is kind of the transitionatory class between the learn how to do things and then learn how to design things.
Yeah.
You know how to do each of these in an individual thing, but now it's trying to throw it all together into how do we have an application? How do we have the communication between all of these components? Such that this can request something of that, get something in return. So this is why we design from the ground up, is that so that once you have a design that works, you can do something like, I'm gonna go code this. I'm not even gonna worry about the rest of this. I'm just gonna take this chunk of this and go make it happen. You can break it down into its components and then kind of assign those components, just like I'm gonna worry about this, I'm gonna worry about this, I'm gonna worry about how these different components communicate with each other. And you can see if you tried to go like start writing this code at this point, there's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way you get it right on the first go. This is a huge design process. This is why it's gonna take weeks. This is not a 1 week project. This is a rest of the quarter project.
Definitely see why people think that it's like such a, like late part of